Hey guys, this is Justin. Hello and welcome to another video. And once again, the power goes to you. It's sort of the Star Wars off season, so I'm answering your questions. If there's one you'd like answered, leave it in the comments and make sure this is important. You include the hashtag AskEck. It's how I find them in my YouTube studio. But today's is pretty fun. Which silly parts of Legends do you nevertheless love? And this is a great video for me to do. I don't have to do a lick of research, but let's talk. And I'm going to start with the new Jedi Order, the Yuuzhan Vong invasion. So I have a podcast called Tap Calf Transmissions. Yes, I know, great name, that I run with my buddy Corey Loses, and it's sort of a Star Wars book club. We've been rereading the new Jedi Order, and actually, shortly after this video goes live, or maybe right before, we're going to be recording our episode on the penultimate book. I'll link to it down below, but the second to last novel is called The Final Prophecy, and I think that name does a good job of laying out the tone of the new Jedi Order. It's very, very serious, but also really cheesy. So the premise of the new Jedi Order is that aliens from outside the galaxy, the Yuuzhan Vong, invade, and they hit the galaxy really hard. At Cern Padal, which I've covered in a battle breakdown, Chewbacca is killed when the Yuuzhan Vong use their gravity technology to pull Cern Padal's moon into a collision course with the planet, and not just Chewie dies, but millions, nearly Anakin as well, and it's an extremely dark moment, not just because of the death of Chewbacca, but because, as Han says in the novel, it really does take down the protective barrier that had covered the Solo and Skywalker families through most of Star Wars Legends. This coincided with the Star Wars novels moving from Bantam to Del Rey, who wanted more serious, more interconnected stories, and the new Jedi Order largely does that. There aren't any deaths as consequential as Chewbacca, especially for movie fans primarily, but Legends characters do bite the dust, including Elegos Akla, and of course Anakin Solo himself later on, which is made all the more dark and depressing because of the rift caused between him and his father by Chewbacca's death. The thing is, as this is happening, as the Vong are attacking the galaxy, we're learning more about the Yuuzhan Vong themselves, and they are, at their base, a very silly and unserious species, only because they're played completely seriously, if that makes any sense. The Yuuzhan Vong are like every goth kid ever rolled up into one alien race. I've said on the podcast that they're sometimes written almost to be edgy for edginess' sake, like they worship pain, they ritually mutilate themselves. Everything they do is almost like it's designed to be the antithesis of the taste of those within the galaxy. Like, instead of having communicators so they can talk to each other, they have these things called villups, which you have to like stroke gently, and then they open up and mutate themselves into the face of whoever you're talking to. The Yuuzhan Vong also hate traditional technology. They rely only on what are known as biotes, bioengineered life forms, serving as everything from their ships to their armor, and it does all come together to be really cheesy, but I still really enjoy the new Jedi Order, especially because it does a great job of visiting many of the past storylines featured in prior trilogies, one-off books. We have, for example, Force Heretic 2, which connects to the Truce at Pakura. It really is a best-of celebration of the Bantam era while also facing off with this new enemy, which completely changes the galaxy. But yeah, the Vong are cheesy, and the fact that they are supposed to be so different, but they are also essentially just slightly different humans, kind of takes away from it, as does the fact that the Yuuzhan Vong War is kind of ignored after the new Jedi Order. This is an event which radically transformed the galaxy, literally transformed the galaxy. Planets like Coruscant are essentially demolished, with the Yuuzhan Vong terraforming countless worlds. Afterwards, it's kind of just a thing that happens, but you don't see the practical effects a whole lot. Things kind of return to the status quo, and I think that's a bit of a bummer. There were also elements within the new Jedi Order which themselves were even further corny or cheesy. I think the best example of that is probably Tahiri. So the cool thing that the new Jedi Order does, as I alluded to, is bring back characters from the prior novels, even characters like Tahiri, who first appeared in young reader novels. Tahiri was the little friend of Anakin, originally from a book meant for children, and she goes through quite a transformation, some of which is good, other parts which are less good. She's essentially transformed by Yuuzhan Vong shapers, the people who make Yuuzhan Vong technology, They're trying to create a Vong Jedi hybrid, and after dealing with this loss of Anakin, a person who she realizes she's been falling in love with in a storyline I quite like, she has to deal with this second story of having to square that Yuuzhan Vong personality, which has appeared inside of her mind, and that leads to a scene where she's literally trapped inside of her head fighting the Yuuzhan Vong version of herself, and they end up sort of melding into one. They hug it out inside her brain, and instead of it just being Tahiri, a human, she becomes Tahiri, this human Vong hybrid. If it sounds cheesy, I promise you it's worse in the books. Maybe that's controversial. I know I've got a lot of Legends fans, but it's just very goofy. It's like something out of a vampire or a superhero show. And honestly, the truth is that a lot of Star Wars Legends is like that. Whether it's individual stories or greater storylines, you see lots of that in Star Wars Legends, but you also see a lot of that in Star Wars as a whole. In Empire Strikes Back, arguably the greatest Star Wars movie, they fly into the mouth of a giant space slug. There are many Star Wars stories, books, whatever in Legends that when I look at objectively, I think are quite silly, but I still enjoy reading them. Star Wars is pulpy by its nature. Sometimes the stories don't work out and the silliness for me is less charming. Children of the Jedi is a story that I really dislike. Essentially, Luke finds a haunted computer with the soul of a Jedi in it. She ends up taking the body of one of his students. It's more consensual than that, but they fall in love for a time, and it's not great. I mean, the Swarm War is about fighting bugs. Fate of the Jedi is about Abeloth escaping from a sheath of black holes within the Maw cluster. I also think that a lot of Star Wars stories, even the really good ones, have a few common mistakes. For example, Star Wars Legends and Canon 2, of course, often doesn't understand scale, even in good books like the X-Wing series. When it comes to the size of the battle, the number of forces on each side, it just doesn't really make sense. But going back to some of the older stories, the silliness ends up being some of what makes it endearing. The novel The Crystal Star, with the interdimensional being known as Waru, is very silly, but it ends up being somewhat memorable for that. It's just so schlocky. Same with if you read the old Star Wars Marvel comics, which were releasing during and shortly after the original trilogy. Those are very, very silly, but also very entertaining. I think comics as a whole really take a lot of liberties when it comes to storytelling, convenience being the most important thing. How can something happen, not whether it actually makes any sort of sense. The last thing that just came to my mind as I was recording this, and I actually alluded to it a little bit earlier, the Truce Epicura. So in the Truce Epicura, you have a planet sort of near the edge of the galaxy. It gets attacked by these race of aliens. The thing is, they also happen to look like dinosaurs, and they've got a device which literally steals your soul and uses it to power their machines. So yes, that's quite silly, but I also really like those stories, and within there's lots of fun bits of lore. You give an adventure with all the characters you know and love, and that's honestly how I feel a lot about Star Wars Legends at this point. There were many things which were silly because they're just not really in line with how the universe operates. When you read the Jedi Academy trilogy and you learn about Corellian Jedi, or about how Jedi used to be before the prequels were established, or you see characters like Dorsk 81 who don't really mix with the rest of the universe as it would develop, yeah, that stands out. I think that if anything, canon could probably serve to get a little bit sillier. I think sometimes the novels take themselves a little too seriously. Like, that was something I felt when reading Alphabet Squadron for the first time. Now, I actually didn't like that book on my first reading, and I really came around to it, but you don't always need to take things so seriously, I guess. That's just my thoughts, though. Thanks for the great question. If you've got one, again, leave it down below with the hashtag AskEck, but I'll see you next time. Be safe, have a good one, and may the Force be with you.